Hello, I'm Gabby, brought to you by free mental health and wellness app My Possible Self in partnership with the Priory Healthcare. Welcome to today's episode of the Happier Life Project, which is focusing on demystifying women's reproductive health. Now, when I say a female's reproductive system, flagging from the get-go, this doesn't mean that we're doing a conversation around conceiving, pregnancy and childbirth today. Reproductive health is the health of an individual's reproductive system during all stages of their life. And when it comes to a female's, there are so many mixed messages and conflicting opinions out there. I really wanted to get to the truth and facts on the areas that women can really struggle with a guest who has made it her life's purpose to smash the taboos and encourage open, frank communication and conversation. Dr. Brooke Vandermolen, aka online, the OBGYN mum, is a practicing NHS Obstetrics and Gynaecology doctor, as well as a mother to 2 babies. After having difficulty finding accurate, evidence-based information to trust to guide her through her own first-time pregnancy and parenthood, Brooke began sharing insights and tips around pregnancy, birth, fertility, menopause, and more through blog posts and social media. Her evidence-based information has taken the internet by storm, smashing down taboos, and we're going to cover many of the myths and misconceptions today in this conversation. Should we be using feminine hygiene products? What is a normal menstrual cycle? Can diet really affect fertility? What if I don't have a symmetrical looking vulva? Is it okay to have a bit of discharge every day? And why are our emotions so influenced by our reproductive organs? I'm really going there today on the podcast, and I'm taking you with me. So, ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Brooke, to the Happier Life Project. I've decided to call this episode Demystifying Women's Reproductive Health because you know more than most. There's a lot of myths and confusion and taboo around the subject of women's reproductive health. The root of this confusion and the taboo and whatnot, is it because there's been a lot of we shouldn't be talking about it in public until maybe recent years? Do you think that's why people are so confused?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a lot of women's health, whether it's for kind of cultural reasons, I'm not sure, that has been brushed under the carpet. I think in certain cultures, for example, periods are thought of as dirty, that they're just something to kind of to hide away, to cleanse yourself, that you can't be a part of the same part of society at the time when you're bleeding, for example. So I think there is some cultures where these things aren't openly discussed. And I think even in Western society, even in kind of England in general, I think there is this kind of idea of you just get on with it. In a lot of ways, as women, we've taken a lot of steps forward when it comes to working and equality. I mean, we've still got a long way to go. But because of that, some parts of women's health, we've kind of just had to suck up and just say, well, that's fine. I'm going to work through the menopause because I've got to show everyone that I can still do it and I can just get on with things in the same way. And we haven't been able to discuss and say, you know what, this is what we are going through and this is what we need to put in place in order for things to be equal. So I'm glad that a lot of these conversations are being opened up more. And certainly maybe social media has helped us to normalize some of these conversations. I think prior to those days, we often felt, like you said, alone in going through things. So yeah, we've made a lot of changes in recent years, some good, some bad, but I hope that the ability to speak openly about women's health is something that stays with us.
Well, I mean, speaking of social media, you've got kind of 2 major strings to your bow, right? Because you are a working, very busy doctor, but then you also are a medical content creator. So I'm curious, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did one influence the other?
Oh, I never intended to make content or be on social media, actually. So definitely that did not come first. I was working as a doctor. I'd chosen obs and gynae as my kind of preferred specialty and was embarking on that career. Fell pregnant myself for the first time and realized that, like many things, we don't really talk about falling pregnant, how to fall pregnant. We're not really taught it in school. We're talking about how to not fall pregnant. We're talking about, taught about contraception, but we aren't really talked about the fact that things may not happen for you immediately the first month you try, and what changes you might expect in your body when you do fall pregnant. And I had a bit of knowledge because I was a couple of years into a career of obs and gynae, but even then there was a lot of things that I didn't really appreciate or understand, because I learned about when things go wrong, and I didn't really know about all the changes that might happen, which is just part and parcel of normal pregnancy. So it was not the earliest days of Instagram. It had been around for a few years, but there weren't that many people creating content from a medical perspective when I started. There wasn't a lot of people for me to look to, but I knew there were some people using these platforms to share not just fashion tips or food. And I just thought, it would be quite nice to talk about my journey and also my experience and my expertise or my understanding of evidence, and try and put that out there for other people who might feel similarly to me. So that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah, I think just judging by the number of followers you have, there are a lot of ladies in particular that are like, yes, we need help on this. Like, we don't know who to talk to about it. Is it better to say women's reproductive health or say sexual and reproductive health? Because we're not just going to focus solely on conceiving in the conversation today. I just want to make sure that we're kind of opening it up to talking about periods, talking about embarrassing body bits.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think my own specialty doesn't have a great name at the moment. We've got kind of obstetrics and gynaecology. Most people don't know what that means. And I don't really like calling it women's health, because a lot of our patients don't necessarily identify as women and may not identify as mothers either. And so talking about women's reproductive health may kind of, a whole group of people may not feel included by that. So I try to be inclusive, but I also recognize that even what we call ourselves is not particularly inclusive.
It's interesting you say that, because I struggled as well, even coming up with like the episode title, because I was like, well, calling it women's reproductive health, does that make people think we're talking about a very specific thing? But then, calling it women's health seemed a bit too broad and too ambiguous.
Yeah, I mean, I think, women's health, these are the issues that affect people that identify as women, people who are born with a uterus, people who have periods. I recognize that not everybody that has periods identifies as a woman, but equally some of the challenges that we're talking about when it comes to, say, periods in the workplace are more. I think it's very difficult to be inclusive for both and also not leave people out. I hope people understand that the effort is made there. And I think it's okay to say women's health, but also be talking and using terms like people who have periods. I try to just do both.
Interesting. I'm curious, what's the number one gynecological concern that you see patients for?
That very much depends on which clinic I'm in, because I see people from across different clinics, and we've got clinics, for example, that are more focused on menstrual health. So I see a lot of teenagers and adolescents at the moment. So painful or irregular periods. So anything heavy, painful, irregular periods. But also we've got clinics that focus on things like early menopause or fertility issues. So a whole host of things. So there's not any one thing that I necessarily see patients for, because we've got different clinics that specialize in different aspects of gynecology.
Right.
In terms of like when I'm on social media and I'm talking, one of the common questions I get asked about are changes to people's periods through their lifetime. And I think we don't necessarily appreciate that. But maybe, for example, having irregular or painful periods in adolescence isn't necessarily appreciated, that may improve over time. But also people don't expect that they're going to have maybe heavier periods after they give birth, or no periods after birth. So period changes after pregnancy, for example, is also kind of a common area that I feel that people don't fully understand or appreciate, or have a lot of questions about.
Wow,
and then also in later life, as we head towards the menopause, we often experience heavier, more painful periods again, even in the run-up, several years in the run-up to menopause.
I mean, men who identify as men, they do have it easier, don't they, in terms of the reproductive health? Like, I don't think anybody can particularly argue with that.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, because I've never really thought about it before, Why are a female's reproductive years so influential to our emotions?
Yeah, well, when you're in your reproductive years, that means that you're having a kind of a menstrual cycle. That means you're ovulating. That's the whole kind of key. Your reproductive years start when your ovaries turn on and start releasing an egg each month. And your time when you're fertile, your reproductive years are over when you reach the menopause, which means you've run out of eggs, you stop ovulating. And so the whole point of that menstrual cycle is you've got a cycle of hormonal changes that happen with it. So that happens each month. When you ovulate, your body's levels of estrogen and progesterone are changing constantly in a cyclical way. So I would say that's probably why our cycles do have such a significant impact, because of the changes in hormones that go along with it. But also it's a time in your life where you are going through a number of those changes during those reproductive years. You might be, trying for a baby. Fertility might encompass, you might think of it as just taking a couple of months, but for many people, they don't expect to have a 5 or 10-year journey to have a baby, just because it takes so long to fall pregnant. Pregnancies as well, and how that has a big impact on both your hormones and also how you feel in yourself and in your body and in the workplace. So yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons that our reproductive years have a more significant impact than we necessarily expect.
Yeah, because I think about the emotions that come to mind when we talk about like PMS or PMT. It's the same thing, right? And it's like anger, irritability, depression, like feeling sad. We don't think about it being particularly joyful, it's usually when we're about to come on, right? When we're particularly emotional.
Yes, so the PMS changes, the changes that you're describing, like kind of mood swings, also fatigue, breast tenderness, all of those kind of symptoms are associated with progesterone. So it's that part of the menstrual cycle where you have higher levels of progesterone. And they give you bloating and all of those other things. So yeah, those changes that usually start around a week before your period may begin, definitely bring with them a lot of challenges. And we experience it to different degrees. Some people aren't very sensitive to the progesterone and kind of get on fine and never really notice any PMS symptoms. And other people, it's debilitating for them. It prevents you from even being able to do your job. It gives you this kind of brain fog, inability to concentrate and think straight. And those are the people that we sometimes see in the clinic, and for whom medication can sometimes help.
Yeah, just going back to the clinic thing, I didn't realise that there was different clinics for different aspects of women's reproductive health. Is that all over the country?
No, I would say that it just depends on where you are. Where I am at the moment is quite a specialist gynecological centre. But in general, GPs will be able to deal with many of these problems themselves. So they wouldn't necessarily need specific gynecological input. But then if you try certain things your GP prescribes and they're not working, then the next step might be to refer you to a gynecologist. Some gynecologists might just see, all different issues to do with periods in one clinic. Some people have different clinics for different issues, so that would depend on where you are, but also what type of hospital you're being referred to.
It's really interesting. So I just want to come back to periods for a bit longer. There's no one size fits all. What if we don't have the perfect 28-day cycle, for example? Is it okay if we have the perfect 32-day cycle, or is something wrong?
No, so having a regular cycle is a good sign of health. Some people describe it as kind of like your sixth vital sign. So it's a sign that your body is kind of in a good balance, in an equilibrium. If you have a regular cycle, it doesn't need to be strictly 28 days. Anything from 21 days to about 36 days would be considered completely normal. Even outside of that, if it's regular for you, that would most likely be a sign that you're ovulating, because essentially what a regular cycle tells you is that you're ovulating each month. If there is a big shift in the number of days of your cycle, so some of them are, say, 20 days, so you get a period every 3 weeks, and another time it takes every 45 or 50 days, that is maybe a sign that you're having some cycles where you don't ovulate, where you don't release an egg. So that's a more irregular cycle.
And is that when we'd need to get things looked at?
Yes, irregular menstrual cycles in and of themselves aren't necessarily an issue. It just depends on how much it impacts you. The main important thing is that you should be having at least 4 periods a year. If you have less than that, then there's a chance that the lining of your womb could be thickening up. So we like you to have at least 4 periods a year. If you are having 4 periods a year, actually that's probably enough. So it's just about how inconvenient is it for you to not know when your periods are coming. And the caveat to that is unless you are actually planning to fall pregnant. If you want to fall pregnant, if you're trying for a baby, you should be having a regular cycle, because that would indicate you're ovulating each month. And if you're not, you may not be ovulating. So your efforts of trying to get pregnant may not be successful unless we help you to ovulate. So if you're trying to get pregnant and you're having very irregular cycles, then I'd see your doctor sooner than later.
Wow, you see, I'm already learning things, because I didn't know that 4 periods a year is still deemed as okay in certain cases. I would have thought it would be 11 or 12. What about like occasionally, like usually we're regular, but then we might come on a bit early or we might come on a bit late. Is that anything to worry about, or is that just part of being a lady?
Our menstrual cycle is very sensitive to what's going on in our mind and body, and that's why people consider it to be a sign of health, because actually little things can send your cycle out of track, because it is so sensitive to changes in the hormones that come from the brain. So for example, stress is a big one, and stress you might be aware of, or stress you may not even be aware that you're stressed sometimes. That can definitely cause your cycle to become unexpectedly irregular. Also kind of physical stresses on your body, so that might be that if you're flying a lot, you've got a lot of jet lag, or if you're doing a lot, excessive amounts of exercise. Also the kind of stress where your body is physically stressed because of what you're eating. So for example, if you are counting your calories very carefully and you lose a lot of weight, you're restricting the food that goes into your body. That can cause your periods to disappear altogether, as you might have heard from like athletes, for example, where they're eating very, very strict amounts of food, but also exercising excessively. So those types of things can temporarily affect your cycle. So if you've got the odd cycle that where you skip a month, that's probably okay, especially if you're in tune with yourself and you know why maybe that happened for you. Also, if you get like a vaccination or any other physical stresses like that, that can also, a lot of people notice it when they had the COVID vaccine. You might notice that would cause your cycles to change for a couple of months and settle back again. It's just if they don't settle back, that's when you might want to think what's going on.
Right. So when you're flying, it's not the flying itself that causes the period to sometimes be a bit delayed or come on. You couldn't come on early as well. That's happened to me. I've come on a plane.
Yeah.
Is it the jet lag? It's not the actual it being in the sky.
No, I'm not aware that actually like altitude, for example, can actually cause this period to come on, because it's more about how your hormones react to maybe getting up very early.
It's the stress kind of thing, right?
The changes in time zones and things like that, and stress again.
It's funny how this conversation is happening now. I'm freezing my eggs next month, so I'm going on my own fertility journey at the moment, and I know full well from just, doing my own research, and I've got a loved one that's trying for a while, and I know that stress is like a huge impact of like if you want to get pregnant, isn't it? And actually I'd love to know your advice on, because sometimes stress might be out of our control, if it's like work stress or family stress we're not causing the stress. So then when you're trying to get pregnant, like, are there any things that we can do to help with that?
It's the worst thing to ever say to someone who's trying to get pregnant, isn't it? It's like, oh, well, maybe you're just too stressed. Maybe you should go on holiday and get away from the stress, and then you'll fall pregnant. You can't belittle what stress does to somebody, and also the fact that it's outside of our control. Usually that's why it's stressful. It's stressful because there are things that we feel that we can't manage ourselves. So I don't think it has a significant impact on falling pregnant, but equally it's not something you can just kind of fix in a click of the fingers. Obviously it's about managing the things that you can manage. Can you manage to get a few extra hours sleep? Can you manage to fit some exercise or some yoga or something into your schedule? Which bits of it can you offload to somebody else? Can you get a holiday? Can you get a time away? It doesn't mean to say that you'll necessarily fall pregnant immediately because you've taken a holiday, but more just stepping outside of that same environment. Can you shift those kind of things? And then I also am a big fan of things like mindfulness, and considering whether you could fit that in, even just a few minutes a day. So there are sort of things that you might be able to do, but equally, I wouldn't just put stress down as the only reason that someone can't fall pregnant. And so I would encourage them, if they've been trying for a while and it's not happening, even if they're stressed, even if not, I would seek help rather than trying to manage it all on your own.
And sometimes as well, people do seek help, and there's nothing that any doctor can find, right? This has probably happened with you in terms of people that you've seen, where it's like, well, on paper everything seems fine, it's just sometimes I guess maybe you've just got to be a bit patient.
Yes, I think people don't necessarily appreciate the fact that it's completely normal for it to take a year to fall pregnant. So even if both of the couple have absolutely no fertility issues underlying, it can just take a year to fall pregnant, because your chances of falling pregnant each cycle, I think they're around 20%. Each month, even if you try perfectly, you're having sex on the right days of the month, it can still take a year, up to a year, for you to fall pregnant. And then even then, for about another 10% of people who haven't fallen pregnant by a year, another 10% or so of them will fall pregnant by 2 years. So it's about like 80 to 85% of people will fall pregnant within the first year of trying, and then up to around 90% of them will fall pregnant by the second year.
Okay.
So it can just be time, that can be enough, but you don't want to dismiss it, and you don't want to waste time, because also, as we get older, the quality of our eggs decreases, as you know. And so, we are born with all the eggs we're born with, and then we steadily lose eggs. And the eggs we have remaining are of worse quality as we get older. So you wouldn't want to tell someone, oh, go away, just give it another few years, all of which time they're kind of losing the quality of their eggs by continuing to try for a pregnancy, say, for 3 years. So that's why it is important to seek help after a year, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll definitely need treatment.
I'd love to touch upon, and you mentioned it before, about like diet, and in terms of the impact that has on both our periods and our fertility. If you're underweight, and if you're overweight, neither is good for your reproductive system, right?
Exactly as you said. So I'm not a kind of nutritionist or a dietitian. However, the main thing that I do try to explain to people is that it is about having a healthy and balanced diet, putting in this kind of 3 good sized meals a day, and not eating excessively, and regular exercise, both of which will really help in terms of fertility. And it is all about having your kind of BMI. It's not a great measure, but aiming for your BMI to be in a healthy range, because being underweight or being overweight will impact on your ability to fall pregnant. It's another one that it's easier to say than to actually be able to change it. And it's not to say that everyone is able to change it, but being aware of the things that can have an impact help us to kind of, piece it all together when we're thinking about what things can we try to improve upon if we're trying to fall pregnant.
And does that help as well in terms of irregular periods or heavy periods? Is that ever anything to do with diet?
Yes, it can be. So kind of heavy and painful periods, they often also go alongside with anovulatory cycles, with the fact that if you're not ovulating regularly, then the next periods you have can be more heavy and more painful than the one before. And we also know that, having a higher BMI can lead to conditions like PCOS, or they kind of go alongside with conditions like PCOS, which also make it more difficult to lose weight if you're trying to lose weight. So often these sorts of things do go hand in hand.
And what is PCOS for our listeners?
So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's where you have excessive number of follicles on the ovaries, and they can cause a change in the balance of your hormones. People who have PCOS often have got a slightly higher BMI. They also suffer with things like acne, excessive hair growth on their kind of face or their arms, and sometimes they have difficulty controlling their blood sugar as well, and it can go alongside diabetes. So polycystic ovarian syndrome is an important one to think about. I think a lot of people get given the name of polycystic ovarian syndrome where they may not have necessarily ticked off all of it, and they don't definitely have it, but it's important to be aware if you've got it, because again, things like getting your weight into the healthy limit can improve your periods, as well as improving your chance of falling pregnant when you want to.
I mean, even if you don't want to fall pregnant right now, if you do want to have children in the future, it's worth being on top of all this stuff as of now, don't wait around for it kind of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, these putting into place these changes can take longer, and you don't necessarily want to be under stress to do so. So, I think this is all about maintaining a healthy lifestyle in general.
Can we talk a little bit about body bits? And I think the TV show Naked Attraction has actually done a lot. Are you familiar?
Yes.
So you smell.
I don't love the show, but more because I just don't enjoy watching it. But I'm aware of it.
I know what you're getting at, but I think in terms of like helping people realize that there isn't just one size fits all literally, I think it's done some good things, because if we talk about, and I've actually seen on one of your, I think it was a post or maybe a story or something of yours on Instagram, the vagina, we're talking about the vulva when we're talking about the outside, right? So we're wrong to say our vagina when we're referring to the outside part.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even in terms
Yeah.
of like the shape, and so I think about, and I'm going to go there for everybody, in terms of like, all girls want the neat vulva, but then they're not often given the neat vulva. And that can cause a lot of, again, going back to mental health and emotional health, worry and stress. So what would you say to anybody who might think, well, mine, looks a bit wonky or doesn't look pretty to me? What would you say?
Yeah. Well, I would say we get a lot of the stereotypes of what we think a vulva looks like from porn and things like that. So the images that we, and certainly men are exposed to, are very different from the reality. And it is not normal for example, the labia to be the same size. It is very normal for them to be of differing sizes and have different kind of contours and to not be a smooth, symmetrical shape. That's just not how the vulva is supposed to be. And it might be that if you see these images of this kind of very tidy, symmetrical vulva, they've had some sort of surgery to make it like that. I would say it's very helpful to look at, there's a website I think called the Vulva Gallery. See lots of different images of what different vulvas look like, but vulvas do come in all shapes, sizes, colors, hair distributions, mold patterns, all of these kind of things. It's completely normal. And when someone comes to me saying that they're worried about what their vulva looks like, I try to dig in more into what's made them feel like that, because I don't think we're born with a insecurity about our vulva. I think it comes from somewhere, whether it comes from something that a partner has said to you before or a conversation that your friends have been having, and really trying to understand and unpick where did that insecurity or that worry come from, and what can we do feeling, rather than what can we do to kind of make your vulva fit the kind of normal that you have in your mind.
Yes or no, most vaginal health products are bogus. We shouldn't clean with anything but water.
Yes, I would agree that most products targeted at the vagina, kind of especially when it comes to feminine cleansing, are probably manufactured by men, and they're just a way of kind of furthering this mentality of like vaginas are smelly and dirty and periods are smelly and dirty, and you need these products to make you clean. And the vagina, so we're talking about the internal bits again here now, the vagina is self-cleaning. We cannot say it enough. So that is why you have discharge. It is normal for discharge to have a bit of a smell, a bit of an odor, and that is your body's way of getting rid of the kind of bugs and infections that might live in the vagina. So it is healthy to have discharge, which is kind of white or colorless. And when it comes to wanting to clean or to wash it in the shower, of course, everybody wants to kind of have a wash everywhere, but just make sure you're not using any soap on the vulva, and specifically never washing internally with any kind of soap or body wash or cleansing washes. So you don't need any special product. If you want to buy them, fine, but you don't need any special products that are formulated for the vagina to clean that area. Just washing the outside, the kind of hair-bearing bits with a bit of soapy water on the outside, never on the inside, should be enough. You don't need anything special.
So is it normal to have a bit of discharge every day?
Absolutely, yeah. You'll absolutely notice a bit of discharge every day. Sometimes you might notice a bit of variation in the discharge throughout the cycle. When you're coming up to ovulation, the discharge can become a bit more gloopy and kind of sticky, and later on in the cycle it might be more tacky in terms of how it feels. So there is a change in the discharge throughout the cycle, but it is normal to have some discharge every day,
and it's normal for a little bit of an odor, but not too funky. That's when maybe you want to get it checked out.
What we just want to rule out is any kind of infections. And so it's more about knowing your body and knowing what's normal. So having a bit of a kind of smell there is normal, but if you notice a change in the smell from how it was before, it can indicate an infection.
Keeping on top of being like tested, going for your like cervical screen tests, I realised that I hadn't had the STI test in forever, and I was like, oh my gosh, goodness. And then when I inquired about it, the NHS said, oh no, you order your pack online now for that. So it's like you do that at home. So you still go to see a nurse via your GPs for your cervical test, but then anything else, you've got to make sure that you're on top of that yourself now.
Yes, so I'm not sure if there was ever a regular program for sort of screening for STIs, everyone in the general population. There was one time they were sending it out as kind of like just a big plan to try and test as many people as possible. And they were sending it out, I can't remember if it was people that were age 18 to 25. That was more of a short-term plan. It wasn't an ongoing screening process. The
That makes
screening, like you say,
sense.
is available. It's available and it's free, and all you have to do is request it. And I recommend getting an STI screen every 6 months, especially if you're changing partners. If you've got the same partner, then probably at the start of the relationship is enough. But if you are unsure if you've both got the same partner the whole time, then just getting a regular screening every 6 months. So you can get that via a sexual health clinic, via your GP, via going online. But yeah, you won't usually be sent it spontaneously.
And now when girls, and I actually think it's been rolled out to boys as well, when they're, is it 12 or 13, the HPV vaccine has been rolled out. But for any of us that sort of missed the boat there, and I've heard conflicting stories from two different nurses in terms of being proactive in getting the HPV vaccine. One nurse told me, yes, you should do it because it'll protect you to prevent you from getting it when you have intercourse in the future. Whereas the other nurse said, no, once you start being sexually active, then it's not really worth doing it anymore. That's why we go for kids that are 12 or 13, because it's before they start having sex. So, yeah, I'm clearing that one up.
Yeah, of course. So the reason we have the HPV vaccine, or the reason we worry about HPV at all, is because HPV is a virus. And if you look back at everybody who has cervical cancer, over 97% of people who have cervical cancer have evidence of this virus there. So we know there is association with having this virus and then developing cervical cancer. But it's a very, very, very slow growing cancer. It can take 10 years to grow. So it's a slow growing cancer, and not everyone that has HPV develops cervical cancer. But it's more that we know that if you don't have the HPV, then you've got nearly 0% chance of getting cervical cancer. If you have HPV, it doesn't mean you definitely will get it, but it means that you'll be kept under closer surveillance than someone who doesn't have HPV. There is this vaccine. So the idea is to prevent people actually ever getting that HPV virus themselves. And as you say, the idea of giving it to 12 to 13-year-olds is to try and get it, because it's a virus that's sexually transmitted, but it's not like an STI that gives you kind of symptoms like chlamydia, gonorrhea, and it's very easily passed between sexual partners who won't be aware that they have it. So males and females can carry it. The idea of getting the vaccine before you become sexually active is it protects you before, obviously, you encounter the virus for the first time. The advice is actually that, although you won't get the same protection if you get the vaccine after you've already become sexually active, it may help. There's I think over 100 different types of strains of HPV. So potentially, even if you've only encountered a couple of the strains, by having the vaccine, you might protect yourself against other strains that you haven't encountered, but you would have to pay for it privately. So you wouldn't be able to get it on the NHS if you're kind of outside of that age range. But if you wanted to, you could still get it even later on.
It's only females that it's detectable in as well, and it's through having your smear test.
Well, it is detectable in males as well, and HPV is also associated with other cancers like anal cancers, for example. It's just we don't screen for other cancers, or we don't screen for anything in men that would pick up HPV.
Right.
So it can be detected, but they don't get it checked regularly because it doesn't cause as many problems for men as it does for women or people who have a vagina.
Okay.
And a cervix.
Okay. I wanted to talk actually real quick about fertility as we get older. And you've just said yourself, the eggs, as we age, the quality reduces. There's a lot of emotional and mental pressure, isn't there, on a female in our childbearing years? And then sometimes, if somebody's in their 20s or early 30s, which is the ideal time to get pregnant, they might not be financially secure enough to be able to support a kid, or they might be on their own. They might not have found a partner and they don't want to do it solo. What's your thoughts on a woman's reproductive years and the pressure that is put upon us more than I think we put on ourselves sometimes?
Yeah, it's really difficult, because I probably would identify that I'd be someone that adds to that pressure, because it's something that I think is important that we talk about. But anyone who's ever worked in the kind of fertility area will tell you how it's heartbreaking when you see someone who's say 40, 41, trying to get pregnant at that age and can't. And even IVF is not a guarantee of being able to take home a baby, particularly because when you're over the age of 40, your egg quality reduces so much that the eggs that you are able to get and stimulate may not be able to be fertilized and become a baby. And so it's heartbreaking. And the thing that I guess on one hand, I never want anyone to feel pressure or to feel that we are, judging people or saying, why are you leaving it so late? But equally, as good as technology is, there's just no way around it at the moment that our egg quality decreases over time. And so if you wait until you're in your 40s, which is completely reasonable. Like you say, the cost of living crisis, it's harder for people to get houses, it's harder for women to get promotions, especially after you have children, and all of these kind of things that feed into the decision making, which are all real. But at the same time, we have to talk about that kind of elephant in the room and just say, whatever, you could leave it, but you're leaving it to a lottery, essentially, if you want to wait till later. So we shouldn't be putting pressure, but equally, I think there are options out there if we know that we're going to be leaving it till later on, to try and take back some of the control over our fertility, because it feels a bit like, it's in the hands of others. But the things that I would say, I often get asked by people say, oh, shall I get some of those home fertility testing kits? If I don't recommend any of that. I don't think you need to test your own fertility at home. The one thing that you should be doing, if you think that it's going to be a number of years before you're going to come around to trying to have a baby, is freezing your eggs, because that's the only way that you could try. And it's still not a guarantee, because the eggs that are frozen, you don't know how good their quality will be, and if they will thaw well, they'll, when you take them out of the freezer, if they'll still be usable, but they'll be better than the quality of eggs you'd have later on in life. So it's an insurance policy, but the best insurance policy is trying younger than later on. I'd love to be able to say something different and say, because I'm all for, empowering women and being able to choose your career and put yourself first and come to having the family when you're ready. But there's nothing that you can do about the fact that the age is an important factor.
In some countries, they will let you freeze your eggs for free now. I wish that would be the case in the UK, but I can't see that happening anytime soon. Maybe.
I do and I don't. I guess I think I wouldn't want everyone to think, exactly as I just said, that it would guarantee then that you can leave it till later. Now, I know most people wouldn't choose to it's not like they would be choosing to wait unless that was what was necessary for them at the time. But equally, if you make that the default and it's free, then everyone would freeze their eggs and maybe wait till they're kind of in their late 30s to have a baby, because they've managed to kind of tick off some of those other things on the list before getting around to having a family. But it's not a guarantee, and so it's a very expensive process that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you can for certain have eggs. Some people go through egg collection for freezing and don't even manage to get any eggs at that time. So it can be it's an expensive process to go through. It's an expensive process to store. It's great to have it as an option. It's a privilege because not everybody is obviously able to kind of go ahead with that choice, because you do need to have, in this country at least, the financial kind of stability to be able to invest that in yourself and in your future fertility. But if you are choosing career and finances over the family at the moment, then it is a useful way of kind of putting some of those resources aside for the future.
What do you think of the term geriatric mother? Because I know that there's some petitions going on to try and get that word geriatric removed. Advanced maternal age, I think, is maybe a little bit softer.
I mean, yeah, that word should never be used. I actually haven't heard it in the hospitals in a long time. I don't ever hear anyone using the phrase geriatric mother. Certainly, yeah, I think
usually men. It's usually males.
Yeah, maybe. You shouldn't even be able to be using geriatric in describing someone who's 80 years old, because it's just not a very nice word. So geriatric medicine is now termed care of the older person. So we shouldn't be using that certainly to describe someone who's in their kind of late 30s, early 40s. So no, I don't think that word should ever be used.
We are kind of conditioned to fear aging, and I think to fear the menopause. Part of the fear is the hot flushes and the way your body changes as well as you get older. And what do you say to patients to ease some of those concerns and worries?
I think we've made significant steps forward in recent years. I think there's been quite a spotlight on menopause, which is great because it was definitely brushed under the carpet for too long. And I would encourage people to have a chat with their own mums if they've got a mother around, to understand how their experience was with their menopause, because how your mum experience in menopause is likely to indicate how you might go through it. So if your mum had a very easy menopause, you may have similar. If your mum suffered terribly with, hot sweats and things like that, then you might have similar. Yeah, I think for a long time it was something that you went through behind closed doors and caused a great deal of suffering. And I'm glad that now, the medications that are there have been around for a long time, things like HRT. I think it's been like 50 years of using HRT, but there's been a lot of changes in our approaches to these medications. There was a time when everyone went onto HRT routinely, and it was just like everyone with the menopause had to be on HRT, which wasn't the right approach. There was also a time when nobody got HRT because there was a scare, which were based on not quite correct figures that represented about the breast cancer risk, which we know now is much lower than it was actually suggested. And we've kind of, I think, come to a more balanced position now where we need to treat the person in front of us and treat the individual. And so going to see a doctor and talking about exactly which set of symptoms you have, which ones are bothering you the most, helps them to identify what treatments might be most beneficial to you. And it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach, but more about the individual. But there is help out there. Not everyone that goes through the menopause needs to take HRT, for example. But if you do need it, it's a fantastic way of actually making you feel like yourself and get your old life back again. So there is absolutely a place for it.
How long would you do the HRT for?
It depends. Again, everyone's very different. Some people just need it for a year or a couple of years. Some people can be on it for 10, 20 years. It really is down to the person and how their experience is. And some people try to come off it, find the symptoms, come back. So they go back onto it again.
I know I kind of fast forwarded us there, but I've got that final question. I ask every guest at the end of the episode to set us some homework based on the theme of the conversation. So in this case, Dr. Brooke, what is a simple, actionable step that we can all take when it comes to improving our reproductive health that will help us on our mission to building a happier life?
The one thing I wish more people did was keeping a cycle diary. So keeping a close diary of your periods and also what symptoms you experience at different points in your cycle. It's a really useful resource when you then go to see your doctor. For example, if you're struggling with PMS or cramps or all different things, to be able to show when those happen in your cycle, how long they affect you for. So keeping a diary is a really helpful way of identifying what are causing the issues that you might be facing, and it's something that can start a discussion off for you.
There's some really good apps out there for that now, isn't there?
Yeah, there are.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. So for more on you, it's the obgynmum.com, and on Instagram it's the same handle at the obgynmum.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks again to Dr. Brooke Vandermolen, aka the OBGYN Mum. And thank you to you, my friend, for listening to this episode of the Happier Life Project with me, Gabby Sanderson. And now for the important housekeeping. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, that's me, and of the interviewees. The content of this podcast should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. The Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. If you found this episode helpful and you have the time, please leave us a review. And to find and follow us on social media, if you're not already there, we are at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Please do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.